Hello, everyone, and welcome to War of the Stars, a Star Wars podcast, coming to you always from deep within the Outer Rim, far beyond the watchful eyes of the Galactic Empire. My name is Will, aka Darth Tuba, and joining me, as always, is one of our two co hosts, Garrett. How are you today, Garrett?
I'm doing great, although it feels about the same temperature as if we had two suns broiling a desert planet.
Yes,
It's hot.
and right now for me, it's like the planet of Camino with the heavy amounts of rains that we are getting, and we're supposed to be getting a deluge of water coming down on us for the next 24 hours.
Can you
So
send some of that our way? Because
I,
we could use it.
I really wish there was a technology that allowed us to do that, my friend, because I would love you to have it. Especially California, my goodness. But not joining us this week, of course, John Mark, who is on a much deserved and much needed vacation. So we wish him well, and we promised him we wouldn't burn the place down while he was away.
You did.
So,
I made no such promises.
so okay, well, you heard it here first, folks. You heard it here first. Okay, so we are, so as I said, we're dealing with a lot of rain on this side of the country, and that is always a little scary for collectors of anything, because of when most of us put our collections in our basements, and our basements are the first things to flood. So we have prepared our basements for the contingency plan if things start to happen. Speaking of that, I thought, because that was not very much on my brain this week, because I was setting things up for hopefully uh, no flooding, but you never can be too careful. I was going to talk tonight and see what you want to talk about regarding the state of collecting, the state of Star Wars collecting, what's been going
Man.
on in the world with that. There's been a lot of ups and a lot of downs, a lot of paradigm shifts, if you will, on how we collect over the last decade, really, but especially in post COVID and pandemic. So,
Yeah. When it comes to collecting, I'm kind of a weird thing about it. Like, I collect things because they catch my eye, not because like they're worth anything or have any kind of value. If
hmm
they have value, cool. I'm. It's kind of a weird thing for me. I have my collections are there simply because um, it's something I like.
well, I would tell you that that's probably not as weird or different as you might think among most collectors, at least most collectors of Star Wars. I mean, if you have to take, put aside the people that are collecting very niche, very rare items, like the people like Gus Lopez, who collects props from the movies and like actual screen used props. I mean, these things, I mean, I could sell off my entire collection, and I don't know if I'd be able to buy one piece of one thing that he has in his, because it's just so expensive because of the rarity of it. But
Yeah,
most people that collect, they collect, whether it's Star Wars or anything. I mean, I guess other common things are Lord of the Rings, He-Man, Transformers, Marvel. I mean, there's all sorts of comic books in general,
yeah,
trading cards, whether they be sports cards or non-sports cards. I think that there's a lot of psychological things that go into why people collect, and I don't think it's any one thing. Value, that's a real hard one to do. It's challenging because, even Steven Sansweet, who owns the number one largest collection, Rancho Obi-Wan in California, he always answers the same question. When people ask how much is something worth, his answers is always the same. It's however much you're willing to pay for it,
yeah.
and that really does mess up the playing field when it comes to what things are worth. Now, when you look at vintage collection, there's a lot of pretty collectors divide things into two. There's pre 1986 collecting and post 1986. Everything
Yeah.
before 1986 had one very important detail. There was a real finite amount of product made. The further back you go, the less they made. That's why
Right.
if you want to buy, like, when if you bought if you for the biggest thing I'll talk about is action figures, right? They made a bunch of action figures. They made about roughly between 90 and 100 action figures in the vintage years, but roughly a third for each movie. But the ones in the first movie, like if you made a stormtrooper or Darth Vader or Chewbacca, in the next, and then Empire Strikes Back comes out, they just released the exact same figure. And then they released it again when Return of the Jedi came out. They created new figures too, but they had a lot of re-releases. And
Yeah.
but it did so what a lot of people like to look for is, you know, Chewbacca on a Star Wars card or Chewbacca on an Empire card. You know what I mean? It's a whole bunch of things there. And there are people who do amass an amazing collection of these vintage carded figures. Now, you know, the lingo for people that don't know, carded means it's still in the
Right.
package.
It's still within the blister pack. It hasn't
Right.
been opened,
And
and
then loose meaning, and then is it loose, or is it just a loose card? Is it a loose figure that's missing all of its accessories, or is it loose and complete? You know, that kind of thing.
right.
I can tell you that you know, with each passing year, the more vintage pre 85, 86 figures do go up in price. But if unless they are pristine carded or even, you know, slightly damaged carded, um, there really isn't much of a guarantee of getting like let's just say you're not going to put your kids through college. Um,
No.
that and then we talk about everything post that 1994, 95. That's when they started really, you know, revamp, you know, re-energizing the Star Wars product engine, right? There was stuff in between there, but 94 or 95, that's when they came out with the figures again.
Yeah.
Did you
In
ever
fact,
do you remember those?
oh yeah. Well, what's interesting is, like, I remember going to, like, my local thrifty store before it got bought out by Rite Aid. Uh, my grandmother would take me, and they had like this bargain bin of, like, you could all these figures from Star Wars, and she would buy me a bunch of, like, I had a Rebel pilot, I had Luke in his Jedi tunic, I had Leia in both the Bouche armor as well as her Endor gear, as far as, like, being a scout.
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
I had 3PO and R2D2. I had Vader. Um, I had Chewbacca. I had the Ewok with the little pig hood from Return of the Jedi, because I was born in '82. Return of the Jedi came out the following year, which is the first one I remember seeing in the theater.
Hmm.
And then, they started pumping out the figures. As I mean, I thought they were all there, but and oh, I also had Lando in his bounty hunter garb from Jabba's palace.
Cool. That's one of
And
my
so I
favorite
had a
figures.
bunch. I had a bunch of these characters, and um, it's oh, I even had a scout trooper. But, like, I remember getting them, but, like, at some point they have gone into a box somewhere in my parents' house, um, and I for the life of me can't figure out where the heck they are.
That's what
Um,
you have just described, the story of so many young or middle-aged men's lives, where they
yep,
just, whether they were born in any time in the early 70s to the mid 80s, and Star Wars was still in that popular phase, and
yep,
that is where it went up. My story actually goes much earlier. I was 6 years old when the first movie came out in 77, and
mhm,
and we were no strangers to movie tie-ins. My brother was a big fan of those Mego 7, 8 inch figures, and
yep.
they had DC, Marvel, Star Trek, Planet of the Apes, and I remember my brother was into Planet of the Apes, so I remember,
We had them for Battle of the Planets too.
yeah, we were playing with those, and it was fun, you know. But my I was too young prior to Star Wars. You know, I'd gone to see Disney movies in the drive-in or whatever, but it really wasn't connecting. And then Star Wars came out, and of course changed everything. And of course we probably didn't see that movie. I was not one of those first few to see it when it was only in 32 theaters. I saw it like late in the summer, you know, and when it was finally everywhere. And back then the movies stayed in the theater for, you know, weeks and weeks and weeks at a
Oh
time.
yeah.
And but we didn't really start seeing the toys come out until like the middle of, or early to mid 1978. So I go into a store with my parents, you know, I think it was the Quaker Bridge Mall in near I'm trying to think, near South Brunswick in New Jersey. And there
You're
was
saying
a,
names. I have no idea where anything is in New
yeah, I
Jersey.
know. That's all East Coast to me. For all those East Coasters who might know what I'm talking about. But anyway, do you ever hear of a toy store, KB Toy and Hobby?
Oh yeah, we
Okay.
had we had KB Toys right here in Hanford.
I think it was there. Although that might have been, or it could have just been in like a Sears or a J.C. Penney. I can't remember exactly, but I remember walking in and seeing all these figures dangling from these pegs. I'm like, wait a minute, you can actually get characters from in a movie, even though I had seen that growing up, but I was only like 2 or 3 when I saw that. Now
Yeah.
I was really making the connection and having your own, maybe being able to have your own adventures, and that was really something. So my parents bought us, my brother, a few, and I think I had R2 and Luke, and my brother had Chewbacca and Vader, and
Yeah.
we played with them. And then birthdays came along and there were more figures, and Christmases came along and there were more figures and play sets. And it was very much like my, I did what the kids did. I played with them and did all sorts of. I used to play the album, The Story of Star Wars, which was about a 40-minute version of the story with a narrator and dialogue and music from the movie, and I would act it out, with the toys that I had, and of course I had the Death Star playset, and I used to throw it
Nice.
up in the air when it blew up. But it was great because you just put it right back together. It was fun.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, as far as toys, like I had a lot of the figures, well, some of the figures, and I was able to play with them just enough. I mean, Vader, he didn't really have any accessories other than the colored blade that went into his arm, and his arm was just kind of like held
Yeah,
stiff like this, and you just slid it up, and oh, and there's his lightsaber.
that had to
Um,
hurt.
yeah,
I always
seriously.
thought that.
But so what I would end up doing is I had a lot of them from the 1980s. I had a lot of Mask figurines, Mobile
Okay, I
Armored
remember that.
Command, Mat Tracker, and all that. And
Hmm.
so I would incorporate some of those figurines, and I would do it on a smaller scale because I had more of those and play sets than anything else.
Gotcha. Right.
But I do remember as a kid, as far as like dress up play set type stuff. Um, because I mean, I at one point I think I did dress up as Luke Skywalker for Halloween, but like I remember uh, when we were living in Phoenix, I had the cylinder, the black plastic cylinder for a lightsaber toy.
Yep, I remember
It didn't
that.
have the blade, but it had the stickers. And then at my grandmother's house, Han Solo's blaster, and it had the Return of the Jedi label on the side, or maybe it was embossed into the plastic. I don't know, but I had that, and I played with that all the time. I just could never find any batteries for it, and
I
and I
know.
think I think my grandmother was, and I appreciate this now as a parent to a small child, but I think she was like, "No, we don't have any batteries that fit that toy." Just to avoid all the sound effects.
Oh, I know. I know. Definitely can appreciate that. Yeah, so there was a ton, and one of the things, like, and there has been a lot of documentaries, both, more popular ones like The Toys That Made Us, which is a great thing on Netflix.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
I love
but
that show.
also, I think it was called Plastic Galaxy. Was a more of a
Hmm.
kind of deep in the weeds kind of thing, where it was
Toy
actually.
Galaxy's got some good stuff too.
Yes, Toy
I mean,
Galaxy's put up some good stuff. Analog Toys, another YouTube channel that's talked a lot about it. But one of the things that a lot of they were able to get a lot of the designers and people from Kenner in Cincinnati and interview with them. And it did kind of, it's a fascinating story, of why we have 3 3/4 inch. I mean, 3 3/4 inch wasn't really a thing before Star Wars, and meaning 3 3/4 inches tall. And there's a lot of
yeah,
urban legends as to why that was. I mean, some people said it was the guy who ran Kenner, who just kind of said make them that big. But there are other people that said they used these Fisher Price kind of people to, as demos. They would use Sculpey and stuff, and make the characters out of that, just to kind of give them an idea. But I think the
yeah,
real reason behind it was that size was that they really wanted to sell vehicles. They wanted to sell the land speeder and the X-wing and the Tie Fighter, and they knew that if they were going to do like 12-inch GI Joe figures, like that was the popular thing at the
you'd
time,
have to get really massive toys
right? And that would just
to
be
ride in.
cost prohibitive to do that. So,
Oh yeah,
so it was definitely driven, at least at first, it was driven by vehicles and play sets, and things of that nature. And I was fortunate enough to collect most of it in my childhood, it's the only thing I ever wanted. For 5, 6, 7 years, that was it. My parents would
yeah,
ask me, "What do you want for your birthday?" Star Wars. That Sears catalog would come, and I would circle. and they were, they weren't into it, but they understood that's what I liked, so that's what they got, and I was very fortunate that my parents were able to kind of, help, support my slightly unhealthy habit of Star Wars collecting. But uh then eventually became clearer that the figures are what people really were trying to go after. So, as Empire and Jedi came out, there was a lot more with creatures and characters from Jabba's palace, and
Because then you could actually recreate those adventures, or create something new with them,
right.
and the more accessories you had, or the more versions of a particular character,
Hmm.
then you could reenact those scenes. I mean, having Leia with the Bouche armor was kind of cool because she had the removable helmet and the force pike.
Yep.
Um, Whereas if you had the version like I did, where she's got her forest gear for Endor. She's got the cloak that, or the poncho that you can put over her, and made of some kind of weird fabric, like a nylon type material. And then she had the little blaster gun. So you two different things simultaneously and have different adventures going on depending on what you want to do.
Right, right. So that went on for the first three movies, and then of course when Return of the Jedi ended, there was no new movie coming out. So Kenner
Yeah.
they made two last ditch efforts to well, first Kenner did, and then Kenner and Lucasfilm. Kenner did the Power of the Force line, which was the figures with the coins,
I
and
remember those.
I remember seeing that, and you know first I remember seeing the commercial, and in the commercial there was, of course, the vast majority of the figures were already figures that I had gotten. So I was like, oh, I'm not going to get them again, even though the coin is cool and stuff. But I really wasn't going to do that. And then, but then I noticed that they had about 13, 14, 15 new figures, and the one that stuck out in my head was Luke Skywalker in the Stormtrooper gear with the removable
Yes,
helmet. And I thought, oh, that's cool. That's something I definitely want to,
and they had
you
the
know,
Han Solo one as well.
not on that line. They did not.
They didn't.
They didn't. No, they never made the Han Solo figure. They
I
only not
remember something about him being in there, and like you had to like special order him or something like that.
Now you're getting ahead. That's in the 90s. We're
Oh,
still in
okay.
the we're still in 80, 84, 85, about 84, 85.
Okay.
And yeah, the Power of the Force. That was the one with the coins. And yeah, there was a few figures that were new, but that was the one that I was really hot on getting, and I was able to get most of them. But this point, I'm like, I'm 13, 14, getting into high school. Interests are changing. I never stopped liking Star Wars, but I started, just, I was also starting as a musician, so I was starting getting into practicing more and being more of a musician. So it
Hmm.
just kind of took a back seat. But man, if I could go back, and I remember going to places like KB would have such crazy sales because there was an influx of Star Wars product for Return of the
Yeah.
Jedi and Power of the Force, and it just didn't sell as well because people were losing interest. So they were selling them in the bin for like 50 cents each, $1 each. I'm like, even even back in the 80s, folks, and 50 cents for a figure, you could
That's
you could
not.
you could take $20 and buy literally 40 figures that are
Yeah.
now
Easily.
each worth hundreds of dollars. Ah,
Easily.
kicking ourselves. Anyway, and then the last ditch effort was Lucasfilm okayed a Saturday morning cartoon hour that featured two Saturday morning cartoons. This is 85, and that was
Mhm.
Droids
I
and
remember
Ewoks.
droids.
Yeah.
I remember both of those.
I remember, I'll tell you, one of the things, I guess I'm just an audible person, but I loved those cartoons for the sounds because they just used stock Ben Burt sound effects. So when you heard
Hmm.
blasters, you heard the blasters from Star Wars. When you heard ships flying, you heard the ships flying from Star Wars. So I enjoyed it just for that kind of like, it's still Star Wars. It's still Star Wars. And they did have toys. They had a series of droids figures and a series of Ewoks figures. Although the Ewoks looked weird to me because they weren't like the Ewoks from Return of the Jedi.
Yeah,
Um,
they had more of a cartoonish look
yeah,
to them.
they had a cartoon look. And then I think the Ewoks got a second. Well, they got a second season. I don't think they got any more toys, and that was it. And then from
Yeah.
around now, there was stuff in the middle there. There was the Heir to the Empire book. There was some applause figurines. There
Hmm.
was the Bendum figures, which were just basically those figures that were just all you can bend them in which direction. But essentially Star Wars collecting was dead. And I
Yeah.
remember once we got to like the early 90s, for us at a certain age, we were just, oh my God, if only I could go back into my local fill in the blank department store and see a Star Wars aisle again. That would just be so cool. Well, then eventually we got our wish when Kenner slash Hasbro now started releasing the Power of the Force 2 line, and that was in the about 95. And I'm not going to go into the whole history after this. It's basically from here on.
Yeah.
And from here on, now it was Star Wars for a new generation, but collectors were, going after stuff. Sometimes it was based on nostalgia. Although I will say that those first run of figures, I don't know if you remember those in the 90s, but they were god awful looking. They were
Yeah, they
trying to give
were.
that buff, like
Yeah,
that he
where
man.
Han and Luke were like super buff guys, and it's
And they
like,
had the chest out. I'm like,
yeah, it's like they never looked like. But part of it was, I remember because Kenner had their hand in just about every major property through the 80s and 90s, just about, with a few exceptions,
yeah.
because they're constantly competing with Mattel and Hasbro. And Hasbro wasn't really into the action figure line as they are now, because Hasbro was still part of they were still working on board games and stuff like that.
Uh-huh. Hmm.
But like Kenner had their hand on Mask, Mobile Armored Strike Command, Ghostbusters, which both of those were properties that I loved as a kid, and I collected a ton of their stuff.
Hmm.
Um, Obviously Star Wars, but there's a variety of different toys out there. And then by the time you get to the late '80s, Playmates was hitting it big with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and
Hmm.
that was kind of, since there was nothing new Star Wars related, um, as far as media, it was kind of pushing everything Star Wars to the back burner.
Right.
Uh, and so like, and then you had in the late '80s, you had Thundercats, and you had Silverhawks, and all these other really interesting um, premises for cartoons. And again, playing up to the, hey, let's make a whole mythos out of this with comic books and toys and all the other merchandise you can get. Um, but yeah, by the time the early to mid '90s rolled around, they were trying to bring Star Wars back into popularity, or trying to.
Hmm.
I remember that they used molds from other toy lines that weren't as hot sellers. They tweaked them just enough, and then they rebranded them. Because like I remember when
They
the
did
movie,
that for Star Wars I knew they did that with Star Wars to other brands, like a lot of the Return of the Jedi play sets and figures ended up
Mhm.
being retooled for Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. I have the little Friar Tuck, which besides the head, it's exactly a Gamorrean guard, you
Yeah,
know. But I didn't know they did it in reverse
yeah, like
for Star Wars.
the if you because when the movie Hook came out with Robin Williams,
Hmm.
Kenner did a whole line of action figures, and what was interesting is I had a figure of Peter Pan, and they made him look all buff and strong. Well, and then a couple years later, when they started bringing out some of these newer Star Wars figures, I was looking at some of these figures, and it caught my attention that one of the faces for Luke Skywalker was the face of the Peter Pan figure. They just added longer hair,
Oh,
and
okay.
it had that buff look, and I'm like, this is so weird. I've got this one figure in my toy box, and this figure that's sitting there in the blister pack at KB looks exactly like him, but dressed like Luke Skywalker. It was the
Okay.
strangest thing.
Okay. Well, uh, they so one of the things that happened back in that initial Star Wars release of figures, and then it pretty much continued, year after
Mhm.
year after year, was there was a contingency of adults who were being crazy. I call them crazy collectors, and by the way, I don't mean it in a derogatory
Negatively.
sense. No,
Yeah.
I just mean it in an immensely detailed sense because I remember, I mean, and I wasn't one of that level, and I am a collector, and I consider myself a crazy collector in other ways, but people were going after. I remember the stormtrooper, not stormtrooper, the Boba Fett had like a full disc on his wrist, and then there was one with like a half disc. Obi-Wan had a super long lightsaber, then he had one with a short lightsaber. So people were going after all these variants,
Mm-hmm.
and it was very interesting. And then I remember going to like the occasional toy show, and where all these vendors were there, and I noticed that there would be hard to get figures that you couldn't go to the store to buy them because the way they package them, there might be in a series of figures there might be like a case of 30 where there were like four of everything, and then two of another one and two of another one, and that made
Right.
those two kind of rarer, more rare, and scalpers would go in and buy those figures right away, or they'd slip the manager $20 to get a case, held for them, and then they would sell those figures for crazy amounts of money. So, and then this beautiful and horrible thing called eBay came into play. Beautiful, I say, because it does allow you to basically go to every antique store, flea
Mm-hmm.
market, garage sale in the world and look for literally anything you want ever.
Yep.
Horrible because people with time people got to learn how to play the system and make it so that you end up paying more money. Shipping became crazy expensive,
Yep.
and that kind of thing. So, but many of us collectors learned that if we couldn't get it in the store, we were able to find it usually on something like eBay. But then what ended up happening around that time too was we always had a good chance, especially when there was a movie release. Of course, every time there was a movie release, right?
Mm-hmm.
They have Midnight Madness at Toys R Us. Have you been to one of
Yes.
these? Midnight
No.
Midnight Madness. I have been to every one. I've been since episode 1. I've been to every Midnight Madness. There was one for each of the 3 original movies. There was one for Clone Wars. There was one. I think there were 2 for Clone Wars. I think there was one for the Clone War, the original, when the movie came out, the short Clone Wars movie, and
Mm-hmm.
then they did another one a little few years later. I think, could be wrong on that. And then there was one for episode 7 and episode 8, and I don't think episode 9 did one, or if they did, it was very minor.
No, they didn't do one for episode 9 because by that point, Toys R Us had kind of closed its doors.
Yeah, I think they closed after Last Jedi. You're right.
Yeah.
So, and that's a big thing. But so going from Midnight Madness was, I got to say, was a lot of fun.
Oh, I bet.
It was a little scary, a little bit overwhelming, because you look at this, especially episode 1. Everybody talks about The Force Awakens and the media blitz and merchandising blitz that was. I'm sorry, but I was there for episode 1. Episode 1 was it. I feel blew Force Awakens out of the water when it came to how
I
much
I
product.
I agree. I
I mean,
agree.
it was. I mean, we're talking multiple aisles, like long aisles in Toys R Us and Walmart and Target. It wasn't just but Toys R Us was the king. They were the leader, and
Oh
everybody
yeah.
else kind of followed. Shuffled in and followed suit, and it was, I mean, just incredible. And of course, with the movie coming out, gets the reception that it gets, and what I guess the term I'm learning now in hindsight is many of us adults that were collectors were kind of souveniring. We were buying the figures, but we really weren't playing with the figures. We were buying them and collecting them, which is what we were basically doing with a lot of these figures as adults.
Oh yeah.
Kids were, they were into it, but there was a lot more to keep kids occupied and keep kids' minds and bodies and attention spans. Everything from every other kind of toy under the sun: Nerf, sports, video games, computers,
Yeah.
internet, and just all the stuff that is kind of slowly evolving. The China, having being a teacher, and my wife being a teacher, we see, what the play patterns are like for kids, and it's over the last 20 years, it has changed dramatically.
Oh yeah.
So anyway, and I think that's one of the reasons that Toys R Us, I say that because I think that's one of the reasons that Toys R Us kind of lost their footing. I don't think they evolved like they should have. And
Well, it made it hard for them because once Amazon became as prolific as
yeah.
it is with everything that they're doing,
Hmm.
that made it so much harder. Because then you had like Hasbro, for example, you can go online and buy exactly what it is you want. You'll pay whatever they have set as the price, or if they don't have it because it's no longer in stock or because they aren't making it anymore because of the limited run, you can probably find it on eBay, as you mentioned before, or you can find it on Amazon.
Right.
Uh, Back in the after 2010, so like 2010 was probably the last time I went to Disneyland, and uh, and had a decent enough experience where like I could go around buying souvenirs for myself.
Hmm.
Because I got this sucker. This is I got out of Star Tours, went through the Star Trader store there in Tomorrowland, and the first thing I saw was build your own lightsaber, something I had been wanting to do for years. And so I put this sucker together. I got my crystals and loaded them all up, and I made sure that I liked the sound effect that I liked, and went with the purple blade because it just looked cool. Felt like it was a nice blend between walking the dark side and the light side because that's just me. I like going rogue. Um, and so I built this, but I got really into the idea of building my own saber. Started really getting into the concept of the having those props so I could have them on hand. And so I actually went onto eBay and I found someone was selling two complete sets of the Clone Wars versions of the Build Your Own Lightsaber,
Hmm.
which the hilts are actually a little bit thinner, and instead of having a colored blade like this, they actually had multiphasic bulbs that would change color. They're LED bulbs that
Yeah.
would change color depending on the crystal you put in there.
Right.
Instead of being like a clunky actual plastic crystal, it would be like almost like a card
Hmm.
type of thing. And then you and the blade was actually a clear plastic. It would extend out just like this one would, but it was completely clear, so it would reflect whatever light came up through
Right.
the tube. And so I've got those. I've got both of them. I thought that was pretty cool to have.
Hmm.
But then the other one I got, this one I got in 2007, 2008, and this is the Obi-Wan Kenobi episode 1, episode 2 fully extension lightsaber. It's got all the crashing sounds and all that. But when you pull back on the activation stud, it actually will eject this spring loaded. And I liked it. And so I started going for those toys because action figures are great for me, but like I want to, I want something I can actually play with where I can feel like I'm embedded with it.
Right.
And I don't get the same thing from action figures as I used to as a kid. So those are kind of where I'm at with that.
Well, we're going to come back to that in a minute because that's really fun. That's really interesting you said that. And I'll tell you why in a minute. But just getting away from getting kind of closer to today. Obviously, with the close of Toys R Us, that really did affect toy collecting in general.
Yeah.
Not that it went away. It definitely it shifted into a different way of doing it. And one of the reasons it did that, first of all, there are Hasbro still, I would say, reigns supreme when it comes to the owning the the block when it comes to collecting Star Wars. Star Wars has essentially fallen into with Hasbro's fallen into two categories. It's 3 3/4 inch still, and it's
Hmm.
Black Series, which are about 6 inch figures. And I have noticed that the shift seems to be going more towards Black Series. I think that's because in addition to Star Wars, they have Marvel doing that. They have GI Joe doing that. They have a lot of other they have come DC's doing it. Ghostbusters. You can basically find everything in this, and the 6 inch allows you to get a lot more detail, come with put more accessories, and of course charge more. So that's
And then
kind of
there's
been
the articulation of the different
right.
joints and stuff because that's a huge deal because they're like on Instagram, like like within a day or so after I started following your Instagram
Hmm.
account, I started seeing all these posts of people who are collectors like us, whether it's most of it's Marvel stuff or DC,
Hmm.
but they are taking these figurines, they're posing them in these really cool action shots,
Hmm.
and and then they're digitizing out like any of the
Effects
well, they're
or
digitizing out like the things holding the figures in place.
like the pegs or the springs or whatever that you don't want to see.
Yeah, or the
Yeah.
armatures
Well,
that hold. Yeah.
and the detail that you've had, but now that detail is not only been scaled down, it's also been scaled up. Now, scaled down
Hmm.
meaning the 3 3/4 inch figures are giving this the 6 inch a run for their money, and there's always going to be a nostalgic group like myself who love the packaging. for the old what they call the racing stripe, which is the old Star Wars logo, racing stripe around it.
Mhm.
And they've created, they did it wasn't, in the original packaging, it wasn't Lucasfilm that came up with those. It was Kenner. So they came up with the
Yeah.
Star Wars logo. They came up with the Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, and that was the logo. I mean, it could have been. I shouldn't say it was Kenner, but it was licensing that came up with it. Whether it's Kenner,
Right.
Lucasfilm, it was licensing that came up with that, and they continue to do that with these newer figures. They have a thing called the Vintage Collection, which are all 3 3/4 inch in the original cards, and but they do it for The Force Awakens, Last Jedi, Rise of Skywalker, The Mandalorian, Expanded Universe, even things like Battlefront 2, Fallen, Jedi Fallen Order, like every video game, every Book of Boba Fett, Obi-Wan, all the different
Still
things.
cannot find a decent Star Killer figurine.
Yeah, really? Have you looked? Because
Seriously.
have you really the VC Star Killer figure? You don't like that one? I don't have
No,
it with me.
like,
I mean, it's down in my basement,
I'm
but
I'm thinking, well, from The Force Unleashed.
yeah, I'm talking. That's what I mean. They came out with one within the last year or two. Look it
Did
up.
they?
Pretty sure.
Vintage Collection or Black Series?
No, I thought it was. We're getting. All right, hold on. Vintage. So I'm gonna say Vintage Collection. I'm gonna put VC Star Killer. Um,
I'm
Star.
looking on.
Yeah,
I'm
it's Expanded Universe. I'm putting in a.
Oh, yep, I see it here as the version of him from The Force Awakens Part 2.
It's well, my phone won't come up. You can do it from far away, but yeah, it came out a few years ago, but it's I thought it was pretty good. Anyway though, uh yeah, obviously Hasbro still kind of is the big kid on the block, but there have been other companies that have really gotten involved. Most notably, well, even Hasbro. I mean, one of the things that I've learned is another great YouTuber called Spectral Creative. Have you ever seen that?
No, I haven't.
It's basically a toy maker, right? He's a guy who's worked for Mattel. He worked for Jakks Pacific, and he worked on the Star Wars brand for Jakks Pacific. He did the one with the big figs, the big 18
Mhm.
inch, 2 feet ones, 3 feet ones, and he talks about why things happen the way they are, how it happens in toy companies, why things work, why they don't seem to put the collector first and instead are focusing on the kid market. And that's why the reasons why you go into a Star Wars aisle in a Walmart or Target and you see a lot of things like uh, Mission Fleet or Micro Galaxy Squadron. These are like little smaller detail, smaller figures that many collectors just don't want to start a new line of collecting, so they don't bother. But it's really because they're trying to sell to a kid market. They're trying to follow the trends of what kids like to play with, because that's where the bulk of the sales come from, and us
Yeah.
collectors really don't have it. But there are other things like um, Gentle Giant, which sells like busts and statues. They are more high-end collectibles. They sell one cool thing that Gentle Giant does is they actually have taken the vintage collection, the retro figures from the 70s and 80s, and they've blown them up to like foot size, foot tall, and just made like larger versions of them, which are kind of cool.
Huh.
Yeah, they're really fun. Sideshow has made they for a while had the license for the 12-inch, like more detailed, really nice 12-inch figures.
Yeah.
And then Hot Toys came along, and I don't know, I'm a little confused by it. There's Sideshow, there's Hot Toys. I don't have them all, but I order them once in a while from the Sideshow website. And sometimes the figure comes in and it says Sideshow on the box, and sometimes it comes in and it says Hot Toys. Hot Toys seems to be like the absolute 100% if you want a photo real, movie accurate version of a character, not just from Star Wars, but from many franchises, but in 12-inch format. You want to do Star Tours. You want to do Hot Toys, and it's incredible what they come up with. Obviously, it's more expensive,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
and then there's some places from Japan. There's Bandai, which do like kind of like Black Series size figures. Some like them better, but they don't sell them here. You either have to buy them on the secondary market or order them from Japan and pay oodles and oodles of shipping cost. And then Kotobukiya does statues and other kind of collectibles. And then of course there's Lego. And I got to say, for 25 years, Lego has really been what I feel is the absolute like king of creating Star Wars product, IP product, and being able to keep it constantly flowing, new ideas, new items coming in. That's where Hasbro's kind of had issues with shipping and distribution. You mentioned before how you can go onto Hasbro and make a purchase, just go online. Well, I got to tell you, it's not as easy as that. What's been happening is everything they've been doing everything as pre-orders. So you pre-order, and oh, we're going to release these figures on this date. So that day comes, and you're not going to order the figure. You're going to pre-order the figure. And the next week they do it again. And the next week they do it again. So it used to be you go into a store and you just kind of go in and, oh, look, the whole case is there. I'm going to buy the case or buy one of each. Or, oh, there's 2 here. Next week, oh, there's 3 here. But here it's all pre-ordered and they don't know when everything's coming in. And you can have as many as a collector, you can be collecting and setting up as many as 50, 60, 70 individual pre-orders. And then sometimes they all ship at once, which is what happened to me when I was on vacation. And for a few weeks, and I had boxes and boxes stacking up in front of my house. Thank heavens I had a person, house sitter, come and grab them. But it can be very frustrating because it's just and out of nowhere they can cancel for no reason, and no reason that they give you. So it's just it can be very
Yeah.
frustrating. So, but it is just the state of it, and they're getting better. I will say this: they seem to be, supply chain and shipping issues seem to be resolving somewhat, so that's good. But all those things that happen, also think companies like Disney Parks. You mentioned that's what I want to mention. Disney Parks, since they bought the Lucasfilm license, has done some amazing things. Most notably, Galaxy's Edge, which is a land both within Disneyland and within Hollywood Studios and Disney World Florida, and there's not a single product in there that's available anywhere else outside of Disney, outside of there. So, and there's tons and tons of product. Now, you can pick and choose. It's definitely more for the Star Wars fan that wants to feel like they're living in the universe. So you talk about building a lightsaber. They have a whole lightsaber building experience. Of course, this is much more high end.
And with the high end comes
Comes
a higher cost as well. Like
yes,
I've wanted to go to Galaxy's Edge, and part of that is just for the sake of going and riding on the rides. They look so cool. Like I've watched like the first person, POV, going through the ride, and while as cool as that is, it's not anywhere close to being the same as being there.
absolutely.
Um,
You know,
and I mean, as a foodie, I want to go. Like, it's been my experience that some food items in the park are not great. I mean, if I go and grab churros are always going to be good. I'm never going to have a problem with churros, because churros are just
churros.
fantastic. But I mean, like, I'm the kind of person where like I will try to avoid eating in the park as much as I can, unless like the last time I was in Disneyland was 4 years ago, 4.5 years ago, and I was with a group of friends, and obviously this is before Galaxy's Edge had ever been announced, or maybe it had been, they just hadn't. They just said, "Hey, coming soon."
Right.
Um, but yeah, I remember being there. They had closed down parts of Thunder Mountain Ranch to start making those construction plans. But me and the group I was with, we went. I mean, we specifically went to go eat at Blue Bayou because nobody of all the people in our group, I was the only person who had ever eaten there before.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm like, yeah, let's go eat there. And so, but I would like to go and try it. I don't know how you are about, like, the tavern or the canteen or whatever, but there's some drinks there that look pretty good.
Oh,
Although,
I got to tell you, it's amazing, and I'm so fortunate to be able to get there as much as I do, and I've been able to go down, and there are, essentially, when you just speaking of food, there's essentially the Rano Roaster, which is a very popular kind of like a sausage kind of wrap that you can get, and a bunch of variants around it. There's the Docking Bay 94 or Docking Bay 7. I would say Docking Bay 94 because that's from the movie. Docking Bay 7, which is there's not a sit down restaurant. It's like a counter service, but you can order all the different kind of foods, and it's I have tried every single thing that they serve there, and I've loved every single thing that they serve there. It does have, they do, there's something about otherworldly food that has to be spicy. It's not overly spicy. It's just there's unique spices to it. So you got to be a little willing to try those things. But most of the Docking Bay 7 food to me is a hit. So, when it comes to hit or miss. There's the blue milk and the green milk. Everybody has an opinion about it. I've never had a problem with either. The only thing you got to know, all I warn people is do not go in expecting a milkshake. Think more like a smoothie. Because
Yeah, that's what I've heard.
yeah,
And
and I think once you go in expecting it to be more of a fruity smoothie flavor, you're fine. But if you go in there expecting a milkshake, you're not gonna, it's gonna throw you. And I am a little partial to the blue milk over the green milk, but I don't hate the green milk. Some people like to combine them, and you can get them with rum or with tequila, so you can enjoy the alcohol there. And then speaking of that, I'm not a huge drinker, but Cantina, the Oga's Cantina, has a dozen different drinks, both with and without alcohol, that I've heard are very popular. Something that your Galaxy's Edge that California had for a long time that we didn't have on here in the East Coast was it was a Black Spire cold brew, and it's basically a cold brew coffee, but it was
yeah,
with Cocoa Puffs and a cream cheese kind of creamer on the top, and it's the
it
most
sounds
amazing
really
thing.
sugary, and I think I would enjoy that.
Oh, it's amazing. And you mix it up and it's so good. I can't even tell you. And they finally got it on the East Coast. And I think they just clamored. People were like, because, I know that Disneyland is more of a locals park. So they try to mix things
Yeah.
up a little bit. They do slightly different foods here and there. They add things, they take things away. Well, when they added that and they didn't add it on the East Coast, there were,
Well, the other thing
there were
is, yeah,
words.
uh,
Words were
cold brew
spoken.
itself is more popular here on the West Coast than it is, I think, over on the East Coast. Because
I,
like my sister lives in Brooklyn, and and like, yeah, Starbucks is doing a lot of cold brew, but like not a lot of other places are, and so I think it's a kind of a regional thing as
yeah.
well.
It's starting
So
to
like,
come though. I've heard a lot more and more places have it here. Like Dunkin' Donuts now has it, and
yeah,
so it's becoming more and more of a thing. So we'll see where that goes. But so yeah, but Galaxy's Edge in and of itself is really the adults' playground. I mean, kids love it, and they have a great time walking around, and there's characters there, and this it's just a cool place. But it is a unique experiment of what it's like to be a Star Wars fan that rather than playing with your toys, playing your adventures, you're doing it for real.
yeah,
And there's some really really cool things. But Disney parks, even before Galaxy's Edge opened, they did a lot of cool things. You were talking about build a lightsaber. They were also doing build a droid. They had a little build a droid where you can put everything together and make your own droid. They've now released like Halloween themed droids, R2 units, and Christmas themed, and all sorts of different ones every year. And people
yeah.
seek them out. So there's no end in sight for that. I will say that the whole there is I've been noticing in stores that we're getting a slow return to normal. Like we're seeing things in the stores again.
Hmm.
Um, I know that I will say that as a collector, I've actually kind of shifted. I still collect, but I did something for the first time this past June. I had a huge yard sale that I sold off a huge chunk of my collection. You'd not know what to look at my basement, but I did. I sold off a huge chunk. Now, why did I do this? Well, and I talk about this on my channel. Every collector's lament. There's only so much room. When the original trilogy came out, as much Star Wars as there was, when it came to the figures and the toys and the more ancillary items that people like to collect, there wasn't that much.
Yeah,
It was a very doable amount. And then when the new one came out in '95 and they started releasing figures again, we were thinking they were just going to make a little line of figures, maybe 12 figures and that would be it. So everyone was trying to get all the figures. Then 12 all of a sudden became 24, and then became 50, and then became 100. And next thing you know, they're releasing the, Boba Fett 500th figure, and then next thing you know, they're, episode one, episode two, episode three, Clone Wars
yeah,
has figures. And now, then my favorite was when Lucasfilm, or sorry, Disney bought Lucasfilm, and there was a press conference with Disney licensing, and they said, yeah, it went like this. It said, this is like 2000, I guess 12, 13.
Yeah, something
We
like
had
that.
we
Yeah,
gotten through the next trilogy. There had been the Clone Wars, tons of collecting, tons of merchandise out there at this
yeah.
point. And Disney went in a press conference. They said something, and I remember this, almost word for word. Said, "Well, we've analyzed the Lucasfilm licensing model, and we feel that while it's very nice and it's been very successful for them, we feel that for Disney it's not quite as aggressive. So we're going to be really pushing harder on licensing." We're all like, "What are you? What?" All of a sudden, collectors everywhere were like, "Oh my
So
god!"
they're saturating the market
They're,
with as much stuff as possible.
I mean, it was both that, the saturation part of like, oh my God, anybody who did collect for value was not going to be able to retain the value of what they had, but also
Right.
people who just liked the cool stuff that they were coming out with, especially when they came out with stuff in Galaxy's Edge, and it was like, oh my God, everything in this, every single thing here is amazing. So, oh, and then of course I forgot about one company that has cornered the market on certain things, and that is our good old friends at Funko Pop.
Dude,
Funko
I
Pop.
my son is like completely obsessed with Godzilla.
Oh my God,
Part
really?
well, for a 5.5-year-old, you think that's kind of weird, but with my son, he's one, he's on the spectrum, so he's going to cling on to certain things far better than he would others. But yeah, I inadvertently let him watch an old 1960s. It was Godzilla versus Mega Godzilla, and even though he had never seen the movie, he quickly picked out that the Godzilla we see at the very beginning is actually Mecha Godzilla wearing skin,
Oh, okay.
not the actual Godzilla. Because Godzilla is a good guy, which is great. I'm glad that he picked up on Godzilla being a protector and a hero, but he got really into it, and we've had to curb that because he starts reenacting.
Oh no.
But um,
Or you could just build him a little like, Tokyo out of
well,
like blocks.
the comic book shop here in town, the guy who runs it, his family has been involved with the 501st for the longest time,
Hmm.
and and so he's got a Clone Commander Vil costume. He's got Boba Fett, Scout Trooper armor. So he and then he does all sorts of cosplay, but he has a whole line of Funko Pops just on display in the front of his store, and he had Godzilla, and so I had to get it for my kid because
Of course. Yeah, so
that's what he likes.
Funko Pop, man, I mean, they have literally everything, but there's no shortage of Star Wars. And
No,
so I mean, on the one hand, you can say that, there really is I don't think there's any end in sight for, the state of collecting. It's just, how people collect is going to evolve over the years. I do think that like other collectors are kind of, I don't want to say I'm feeling fatigue because I'm not
yeah,
really angry. I'm not angry about it. That's the thing. I don't feel mad. At least there are collectors that get so angry that, Hasbro comes out with, they just announced 2 Andor figures for the Andor series, but only in Black Series. They haven't announced, I don't think, very much for Vintage Collection. And there was another big thing that was a big, huge drama that ended up being nothing, was when Hasbro made a plea, not a plea, a pledge to do away with plastic in their packaging in 2023. And because
they realize their figurines are made of plastic, right?
Well, all right. Here was their actually I'll say this. I don't that doesn't fly that statement doesn't fly with me. I understand why people say that and they joke about it, and I get it, but there is a big difference in what they were saying, which I think makes sense because I've done it as an unboxer. I can tell you this. What happens to all of the boxes when I unbox? They get tossed in the trash and they
Right.
basically end up in a landfill. Okay. Whereas if it's cardboard and I can recycle it, then it's not a big deal. All right.
Yeah.
But if there's a lot of plastic from both the clamshell and all the stuff on the inside to keep it in steady and all the twist
All the
ties and
wires.
everything, all the wiring and everything. So that stuff ends up in a landfill. And there's tons of this stuff going out there. And that was their original argument, was that their original thing was like, look, we understand that kids, generally speaking, a toy, yes, it's made of plastic, but the toy is going to be played with. It's going to be kept in a toy bin. It's going to be passed along to somebody else. It's going to be sold in a yard sale. It's going to be, it's very rarely going to end up in a garbage bin unless it gets eaten up by the dog. Okay. So, that's basically what they said. Whereas the plastic and the packaging gets tossed out. So they said we're going to do away with that by 2023. Well, all the Star Wars collectors and other action figure collectors were like screaming up in arms, "Oh my God, I can't believe you're doing this," because that meant that the vintage collection figure would no longer look like it did.
Yeah.
It would be somehow different. Well, they have since come back and said, "We understand." Now, I don't know if this was a direct response to the backlash or if they had always decided to do this, but they said, "Look, the vintage collection will have the plastic bubble in it because we know that most people collect that, keep it in the package, and it's sought after as a collectible. And again, it'll be it's not going to end up, very unlikely to end up in a landfill because it's going to be passed along." So, but it was all this drama, and I don't know if that was a direct result of it or not. But to me, it's like, please, people, we have a lot more problems in the world than plastic packaging. Whether they want to do away with it or not. So, but for me, it's just become like I've thinned some of it out. Some of it, I like, for example, a lot of the money I made this summer, we went down to Disney and I built a lightsaber. So I
Nice.
used, the money from a bunch of things I sold to build a lightsaber. I built a little droid, and we had dinner at a bunch of nice restaurants. So it ended up being better. And also, just being older and realizing that I don't want to die and leave my wife and daughter with the burden of having to get rid of a basement full of Star Wars stuff. I would like to maybe thin it out a little bit, and as we
Yeah.
go, anyway, so that's kind of the state of it. I think that people, we invite people that listen to email or chime in or give us their thoughts. You can go onto my channel, Darth Thuba Star Wars Unboxing Show, and at YouTube, and kind of chime in on one of the comments in one of the videos there. But I think that's good for today. I think we kind of covered a lot of it.
Yeah.
So Garrett, where can people find you?
People can find me on social media, Instagram and Twitter at GKJ_publishing. You can also find me on YouTube, GKJ Publishing. I'm getting ready to launch my 5th season of book reviews, of all sorts of cool stuff, and I'm really looking forward to that. Um, I've got some great author interviews coming up this season. I'm looking forward to sharing that with people.
Okay, cool. And as I said, you can find me on YouTube at Darth Tuba Star Wars Unboxing Show, at Darth Tuba on Instagram and Twitter, Darth Tuba Star Wars Unboxing page on Facebook, and you can email me at darthtuba77@gmail.com. And as for the podcast proper, we are War of the Stars, a Star Wars podcast. Our email is warofthestars1@gmail.com, which is also our Twitter handle. You can also search War of the Stars, a Star Wars podcast on Instagram and Facebook. We are as a podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and pretty much wherever podcasts can be found. So that'll do it for today, and we'll be back next week with another fun topic. But until then, remember, this isn't just my Star Wars. This isn't just your Star Wars. This is our Star Wars. May the Force be with you all.